talk a little bit about some of the things nationally. And I want to, hopefully we get through this so there are any questions. Anybody recognize this?
I do.
Yeah, okay, all right. This is what you currently state as your mission, vision, and core values. And I'm gonna give you an opportunity at lunch. Do you have any thoughts, particularly on those core values? Because you're going through a lot, a big transition. And one of the things that I think you want to keep in front of you at all times is what do you value? What's important to you as the board? If you think about 3 years from now, how do you want the organization to be characterized? What's important to you in terms of values? And I have some examples we'll talk a little bit later at lunch. One of the things to bear in mind is that you're in a market. Workforce development is in a labor, and it's a market. And we've watched this. If you're an employer, you know that you've probably had to ratchet up something, wages, or your recruitment efforts, or onboarding, or bonuses, or you had to do that in order to retain people. Nationally, every month, about 5.9 million people get hired in the U.S. About 5.7 million separate from their employer. So it's over 100 million transactions a year. And that market changes. It changes dramatically based on things like, maybe AI and ChatGPT. So you've got to constantly be looking and analyzing what's happening in our market. The question came up, but where's the worker? This is what labor force participation looks like in the U.S. And actually it was because of Michelle that I started really to look more in detail. Florida kind of matches the U.S. in terms of what the labor market looks like in terms of labor force participation. So good or bad, that's kind of where you are. When we look at this nationally about where we are in terms of the total U.S. labor force, in red, that's the population that's leaving the market. It's walking out of the labor market. Retirement, backing out of 40 hours a week or 50 hours back into the 20. That blue line is the labor force that supposedly is going to replace them. Anybody notice anything? Yeah, those lines aren't exactly parallel. So when we think about like why automation, I think it's pretty obvious why there has to be automation, because there's not the labor force. One of the things that I started to look at, again because of Michelle, was Japan is held up as an example of where we have a nation with an older labor force, much as ours, but bear in mind, as old as we are the youngest industrialized nation in the world. As old as we are, we're the youngest in the world. Japan is certainly older. So what are the Japanese doing? When I started to look, a couple of things. One, the Japanese used to be able to retire at 60. They've now moved that up to 65. But they're offering incentives to employers to work with those people that's 60 plus in order to keep them in the labor force. The other thing that they're doing is they're focusing on younger women, getting more women, which traditionally the Japanese have not. But they're working to get more young women into the labor force. As a consequence, the national government is investing a lot in child care. But the other thing that we're recognizing, and I think we're seeing some of that here, is that so when you get younger women involved in the labor force, it starts to acerbate the fact that there's not that population coming up or entering the labor force behind them. By the way, this is what you look like in terms of Florida. Not exact same age range, but it gives you the same idea. You have that gap. It's not as big. But one of the things that I think for areas that are growing in population to recognize is there is a limit to that population. The other thing, and I won't make political commentary about it, one way or the other, is the fact that in Japan, about 3% of the labor force is foreign born. In the US, it's over 18% of the current labor force is foreign born. So whatever your thoughts may be, recognize that as tight as our labor market is, as short as qualified workers are in the US, 18% or more of that labor force is foreign born. We rely on foreign born labor. This is a look at that population gap that's in the US. We're about 3 decades into a lag between the labor force leaving, older workers, and younger workers coming in. This balances out with the folks that are in the 4th grade. So if you can wait another 10 years in your business, you're just fine for that labor force to come along. Otherwise, you've got to think about how do you begin to reach that labor force that isn't fully participating. So how do you look at things like transportation? How do you look at childcare? And one thing that a lot of people overlook, I was recently working with a state, and I won't mention which state, but they have a lot of job growth. So we heard from the economic development folks, you know, Jonathan, right, yeah, we got businesses coming in, we got businesses coming in. And one of the workforce people leaned over to me and said, there's only one minor problem with what these businesses pay. I don't know where the hell these people are going to live. There's no housing.
Yeah.
So I think what you have and what the board's got to do, and I think the REACH does do part of that. Remember, the feds are always going to hand you chaos in terms of federal funding. Always. Because a lot of this money comes from different committees on Capitol Hill. I know that part of what the board does is advocate, so I'm happy to help educate the advocates on the board about how to go to some congressional committee and tell them half of your work is going away, they're going to another committee. So if you all want to volunteer to do that, we're happy to form that team to do it. So the feds are going to hand you chaos, so it's really up to the state, and really beyond the state, it's up to you to figure out how do we get the players at the table to really make sense of what we need to be doing. So when I looked at what your population, what your education looks like, and one of the things I always do when I'm going to an area is look at what's the educational attainment look like in the region that I'm going to. So when you start to look at where might that labor force be and how do we begin to reach them, you start to look at 84,000, 139,000, 662,000, and 466,000. You still got a pretty good sized labor force in there that you can begin to think about if we're going to reach them. How do we engage them in a conversation about what's it going to take for them to participate? I was just in Las Vegas on business. And one of the crazy good things that has happened in Vegas is one of their new board members owns a fitness center. And he came to the director's name is Jaime. So he came to Jaime and said, we got to figure something out. Jaime goes, well, what do we got to figure out? What's the problem? So he said, I got all these people coming in from business, working out, and the thing they do is they complain all the time they can't find a worker. But if they would get here during the day, there's all these young men primarily who come into the fitness center to work out during the day. And when I talk to them, they're not working, they're not in school,
Maybe they're working a little bit part-time, but they can't figure out where's the job opportunities. So guess what they did?
Put a workforce.
They opened a job center right in the fitness center. That he is not charging Jaime any money. So there is somebody from Las Vegas, from the Southern Nevada Workforce Board, in that fitness center every day, working with a lot of those, again, primarily young men, to get their life put together in a way that they can get the kind of skills they need to participate. That's the kind of innovation that it's going to take to get them engaged. Some things nationally. I was at a robotics seminar a couple of weeks ago with A3, which watches automation across the globe. In a room about this size, I got to watch the video, and then the company that's doing the work was there to talk about it. He threw a bunch of stuff into the room, and the only human command was to the robot, clean up this mess. How's that? And there were 2 bins in the room. One was trash, and one was recyclable. How many of you don't know where to put the bubble wrap? Is it recyclable? Is it garbage? How many of us don't really ever? We sometimes put it in with the rest of the plastic bags or whatever, right? You can be honest, okay, all right.
Don't they tell you not to recycle plastic bottles anymore?
Well, they tell you not to do the bubble wrap, I think. I don't know. I have to look every time, like, oh, what the hell am I supposed to do? Anyway, the point is, that's the only thing the robot missed. Everything else the robot put in the appropriate bin. Blew me away. Blew me away. Every other object in the room, the robot figured out because of photovoltaics and everything else. The AI, the robot figured out what to do with this product. AI is going to be a significant part. It already is a significant part of what we're gonna be doing. In fact, one of the things that I looked at was both agriculture and looked at construction. Safety was a primary concern, but look at this. In the area of construction, exploded. Robotics are being used. In ag, and some of you, anybody here in ag? Okay, one of the really crazy things that I saw is there's a company in India that is working on a robot now that weeds the vegetable fields. It has a photovoltaic in front of it, and by the time it gets back to its mechanical hands, it has already identified what's the weed and what's the plant. And it's now at about 85% accuracy rate. Wow. 85%. I can't even do that. I gotta have the little app on my phone that tells me, is this a real live plant? Is this a weed? and it's knocking it out about 85%. It was crazy. One of the things that the interesting observation, and I shared this with some of the folks afterwards, because there are any of you in robotics or in AI? One of the things that they did throughout the day, different presentations, was to say, oh yeah, it's gonna impact the labor force. Now let me tell you what this machine, and I kept waiting for somebody to say, like, how? Nobody did. So we have some follow-up conversations coming with them about how they're thinking. But the collaboration between humans and robots is here. And it's going to be a big part of what advanced manufacturing and now construction and what agriculture is going to have to figure out. That's going to be part of the skill of workers. So when we look at this, we see a whole group of people who are worried about their jobs. We know that nationally there's all kinds of numbers around like how many jobs are going to be impacted by workforce. Look at that. ZipRecruiter, 76% of Gen Zs worry about their job. Part of what does that is because think about people coming into the labor market or their early parts of their career. What are they working at?
Service-based. Service-based.
Service-based. A lot of it's service-based.
I have a ridiculous question.
No, nothing's ridiculous.
My daughter's 26, and a lot of her friends are influencers. So how much of the workforce is being taken away from people that have these pipe dreams of so-and-so's rich, and I'm not gonna work, and I'm gonna travel around and take pictures and post? It's this whole culture of people that think they don't have to work, and some of them are doing it, and so it's taking on like a life of its own. I mean, I kind of want to do it myself. I just don't think I'm that interesting.
I go back when I first got in this business, there was a guy by the name of Brooks Robinson, not the Brooks Robinson, but Brooks Robinson, who was in economic development. And I was in Pittsburgh at the time, and Brooks made a statement that, you know, we can't just do each other's laundry. At some point, somebody has to make the clothes. Somebody has to make the washer and dryer, and somebody has to install and maintain them. And that was his question back, God, a long time ago. I think that is a question. At what point in time do we get people re-engaged and excited about manufacturing? And I think there's a lot of effort in moving more and more into schools.
That's a great point that you made, Audrey. It led me to think about the other thing that GoDaddy, you know, they have this study called Venture Forward. And post-pandemic, they compared the rates at which people, their new web domains created pre and post-pandemic. And it was like 2.5 million pre-pandemic, and post-pandemic, 2.5 years later, it was like 9 million. And they estimate that half of those folks have left the traditional labor force because they figured out a way, because, you know, we all know what happened in COVID with the UC system. It wasn't function to deal with that mass exodus into unemployment. So nobody got a check. So, oh God, what am I going to do? You know, so a lot of people started doing their own thing. And interestingly enough, you look at zip codes, particularly in East Tampa, there's a ton of it. So not only are we losing them to influencers, but we're losing a lot of people to entrepreneurs. And the problem with micro enterprises is it's not really the chambers thing. It's not really EDO's thing. So it's another way boards really need to support entrepreneurs and micro businesses. You're going to lose a lot of that. But those folks, with the right support, they can be hiring some of those folks.
I think one of the other questions, anybody here an economist? I admit now that my mother has passed that I graduated summa cum barely. And among the courses in that catalog was economics. But one of the interesting things to me that I want to see how this plays out, I was talking to my son, who is the director of education for a hospice service, and he was talking about some of the younger nurses that are coming into their practice. And he was saying that one of the things that's now really hyper of interest to them is our wages and wage rates and wage progression. And part of that is being driven by the fact that after, 3+ years, they're now gonna have to pay their student loan back. And that's gonna take, for many younger people, that's gonna take $300, $400, $500 a month out of their budget. So I don't know what that does to, you know, influencers who maybe have that student loan debt, haven't had to pay it back. They're going to get in for, you know, a surprise in the next month. And I think for a lot of people, like, what's that going to do to consumer demand when we take that kind of consumption out of the market? Because, as you know, it is mainly consumer consumption that drives the U.S. economy. I think this is something that you all know. It's something that, you know, in terms of the performance and the performance in general, that what I see as I talk to the foundations and the other investors, VC investors now, hundreds of millions of dollars being invested in educational technology, but they want to see impact. They want to see a return on that. So I think as you move forward, data is going to increasingly be critical to your work and also to your decision process. Again, one of the things that I argued and still argue is that do we really need a mandatory physical site of a one-stop? The world's digital. Also, I think as you look at what's your website look like? Can you go out on your website and can you navigate some idea about what are the occupations that are rising in the Tampa regions? What might I could do next? Where could I go get help? I think those are some of the challenges that are out there. We have a couple minutes. It's a couple minutes left. If there are any questions, obviously I'll be around so we can answer that. You're standing, John, between us and a break.
All right, sorry. So you talked about two things. One in particular, childcare. So
Yeah, huge.
I know you're in a different role now, but who's going to advocate, particularly when it relates to reauthorization? I mean, you can't explain to you how big of they're going to have to look at early childhood education the same as how they fund K-12. If they don't, we're never going to solve this issue.
They're not going. My prediction is they're not going to. The pressure on Congress is around, they want to see more training. They want to see more skill development because that's their idea of how we're going to solve this problem of employers saying I can't find qualified workers and liberal. They want to see more training. They don't want to see more money spent on, quote, supportive services, which I've argued, and I know I offend people when I say this. What we're trying to do is get skilled workers to business opportunities so that businesses can grow, can be competitive and can grow. It does us little good to enroll somebody in skill development and they do not complete.
Correct.
Or they find a job in another field.
Right.
You know,
It does nothing. So why are we rewarding? Why aren't we rewarding a system, WIOA, that has 80% completion rates? And it's no mystery how we do that. We do that because you've got somebody paying attention to somebody who's in skill development, working with them on life issues like transportation, like housing, like childcare, like everything that happens to us in life. But they don't want to look at that. What they want to look at is, the problem is we just need more skill development. If we can just get more skill development and, anyway.
Good morning. I had an experience that brought me to tag along in what I'm talking about. I was at an airport stop in Charlotte, out of Charlotte. And AI is very effective. It was able to tell the pilot to better not move this plane because they had a mechanical problem. So needless to say, it took me 9 hours to get back because they move everybody in a van with people that I don't know and too close for comfort to take me to another airport. But what that helped me to see was this, because we live in a town where we do have an international airport that is building 16 new gates, international gates. So as a business owner with that in mind, I saw a business opportunity. Nevertheless, CareerSource, it's got to be part of that opportunity. And I don't mean necessarily for me because we work with the airport in a different manner. But one of the things is that it guided me to see, okay, even though the digital system that we have right now is very efficient with allowing us to see if the plane is ready to go or if it's low fuel or anything, we still need manpower to fix it. That led me to find a lady in this town who has a company that does trainings on fixing airports, fixing airplanes, and as well as computers, and is certified by the FAA. Which led me to contact this person and ask him, what is your program looks like? Because of the challenge with childcare and the challenge with transportation. And she has a really neat program that I think the pandemic pushed her into, improve it and pivot it a little. So her program is hybrid. Monday through Friday, people take their classes online in the evenings. And on Saturdays, for 6 months, they go every other Saturday, hands-on on the planes. Needless to say, yes, we do get funds and we're talking about manpower, but where do you put your money? Just like any investors.
Exactly.
And you
But
know,
I'm
the
gonna tell
area
you,
is important,
the
but.
pressure on federal money is gonna be skill development. It is not going to be supportive services. And I think, to your point, John, that's a challenge. One other quick note, as we get into this, and we start looking at how is automation actually gonna impact us? The Canadians have done a very interesting study, Statistics Canada. They looked at about 3,800 firms in Canada that advanced manufacturing that have begun to deploy robots. And what they found was that the entry-level labor force grew, the highly skilled, the technical labor force grew, everything else in between took a hit. All of those things that we thought of as middle skills, robots do. So you can reduce your labor force in that middle. What they also found was for larger companies in there, middle management also went away, because the decisions about the purchase and deployment and the use of the robots was made at a more central location that's responsible for the stock price, the finances of the company. The decisions weren't being made at the plants anymore about the robotic purchase and deployment. So as you think about how is that going to play out in the industries in the Tampa area, I think that's really part of what's going to be important around the sectors. Okay, let's take a break, try to get back